You think you own the lake? Think again. Karen Whitmore shouted from the edge of my dock before I even had time to take a breath. The morning sun barely cresting the treeline, casting golden light across the glassy water that had belonged to my family for generations. The scent of pine needles mixed with the sharp tang of lake water filling my lungs as I stepped onto the worn wooden planks, feeling the familiar vibrations under my boots, every groove, every nail telling a story of summers spent learning to navigate the currents. The smell of varnish and sawdust lingering from the dock. I had restored myself, the pontoon rocking gently against its ropes, polished chrome reflecting the rising sun, reminding me of the countless hours I spent fine-tuning every engine component, every brass fitting, the subtle hum of the bilge pump punctuating the morning stillness, the gravel crunching underfoot as my dog, Rusty, padded along beside me, tail wagging but ears perked, sensing the tension. Karen's white SUV idling at the edge of the boat ramp, the engine growl cutting through the birdsong, her clipboard clenched in one hand, perfectly manicured nails catching the sunlight, the faint smell of her perfume drifting over, sharp and sweet, incongruent with the mechanical smells of my world. The way she stood, hips cocked, body language all authority and entitlement, the sound of her voice carrying over the water, almost bouncing off the buoys marking my property lines. Every word a jab aimed to unsettle me. The motion of her hand pointing toward my pontoon, gesturing as if she had the right to dictate what I could or could not keep on my own lake, my pulse quickening but my mind steady, remembering the deeds, the permits, the countless hours spent researching local ordinances that confirmed my control, the water lapping gently at the pilings, the early morning chill causing goosebumps on my arms, the smell of wet earth rising from the shoreline, the distant call of a loon punctuating the otherwise quiet scene, the sun climbing higher, catching the ripples on the water and casting shimmering patterns on the underside of my boat, the metallic click of the winch Karen had planned to use echoing across the lake before I even had to act, the tension almost palpable, my hands brushing over the smooth wooden railing as I scanned the horizon, noting the positions of every boat, every floating dock, every rope tied down, the subtle smell of diesel from the small maintenance boat I keep nearby mingling with the morning air, the crunch of gravel as I shifted my weight, the faint hum of electronics from the cameras I installed along the shore capturing every angle of the lake, the thrill of knowing that everything she thought she could control was already in my hands, the rising warmth of the sun on my back, grounding me in the moment. The way the water reflected light off the dock pilings creating dancing patterns around my feet, the soft rustle of leaves from the trees bordering the property adding rhythm to the tension. Karen taking a step closer, voice dripping with faux confidence, clipboard raised as if to deliver a verdict, and I exhaled slowly, savoring the anticipation, the quiet knowledge that this confrontation was mine to navigate, the smell of varnish, pine, and lake water mixing in a heady combination as I prepared for the move that would turn the tables, every detail of the morning, the sound, the light, the air, the textures, planting the seeds of a payoff that she had no idea was coming. The sun now higher, glinting off the polished chrome of the pontoon, casting patterns on the calm water, my reflection merging with the lake itself, a calm determination settling over me as I tightened my grip on the dock railing. Eyes never leaving Karen, the tension building, every second charged with the potential for revelation, and the silent promise that by the end of this morning, the lake would remain under the control of its rightful owner, leaving her stunned, questioning, and entirely unprepared for the smart, patient justice that was about to unfold. My name is Jack Thompson, and I have spent nearly 40 years walking the shores of this lake. Every summer morning starting with the sharp smell of pine needles mixed with the damp earth rising from the shoreline, the cool mist of the water brushing my face as the sunlight filters through the trees, glinting off the pontoon I meticulously restored, each brass fitting polished until it caught the light and reflected the hundreds of hours I poured into its upkeep, the engine hum low and steady, a comforting presence that connects me to the countless afternoons I spent learning the currents and the hidden depths of the lake, the gentle splash against the pilings marking the rhythm of my childhood memories, my father teaching me how to measure the depth with a simple pole and read the wind across the water, my grandfather telling stories of generations past, of summer picnics and late-night fishing trips, the feel of worn wooden planks beneath my hands as I pushed the boat off the dock, the faint scent of varnish lingering in the air, the sound of water rippling against the hull, and every detail grounding me in the place my family has cared for, preserving it for decades. The cabin, a low-profile structure with cedar siding and wide windows letting in the morning light, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, mingling with the outdoor aromas, my dog Rusty moving along the dock, ears perked and tail wagging slowly, sensing the calm anticipation in my movements. The gravel crunching softly under my boots as I walk the perimeter, eyes tracing the boundaries marked by worn posts and subtle signs indicating our ownership, remembering the survey maps my grandfather had laid out and the careful measurements he insisted upon, the texture of the earth beneath my fingers as I run them along the posts, the warmth of the sun beginning to coat the water, turning it into a sheet of gold and blue, the distant call of loons echoing across the lake, reminding me of quiet mornings and the continuity of life here, the feel of a gentle breeze across my face carrying the faint perfume of wildflowers from the adjacent meadow, the sound of leaves rustling in the trees blending with the quiet lap of water against the dock pilings, the familiar sight of my pontoon bobbing gently in the calm water, ropes taut and fenders in place, the smell of fuel and engine oil a comforting reminder of maintenance and care, the tactile sensation of the railing under my palms as I adjust the mooring lines, the reassurance of knowing the exact position of each anchor and cleat, every knot tied meticulously and with purpose, my attention to detail reflected in every inch of the shoreline we maintain, the surrounding forest casting long shadows across the water, the faint creak of the dock as it expands with the morning warmth, the rhythmic sound of my own breathing sinking, with the soft lapping of water against the hull, the distant shimmer of the sun on ripples creating a mosaic of light across the surface, the smell of damp moss and pine resin rising from the bank as the morning sun dries the edges, the gentle hum of a small fan inside the cabin mixing with the ambient sounds outside, the overall sensation of connection to this place, the deep-seated feeling of responsibility and belonging, knowing that this lake and all it encompasses are part of a heritage I carry forward, grounding every thought, every movement, in the purpose of preserving what my family has nurtured, reinforcing a sense of calm determination and quiet pride in the work, care, and attention that has made this lake more than a body of water, but a legacy that guides my every decision as I prepare for the day ahead and anticipate the challenge of ensuring that control remains where it rightfully belongs. Karen Whitmore did not belong to this place, and that was obvious the moment she stepped out of her white SUV like she was arriving at a board meeting instead of a lakeshore, the door shutting with a sharp, hollow thud that echoed across the still water, her heels clicking against the gravel in a rhythm that felt out of place against the soft crunch of boots and the natural hush of morning. The faint smell of her expensive perfume cutting through the clean scent of pine and damp earth like something artificial forced into a world that did not ask for it. Her blazer crisp, perfectly pressed, a bright contrast to the worn flannel and sun-faded shirts that defined everyone who had ever actually worked this land. The clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority, her fingers tapping it lightly as she scanned the dock, the boat, the shoreline, her eyes moving not with appreciation but with calculation, measuring, judging, assigning value in ways that had nothing to do with the history beneath her feet, the quiet hum of her vehicle still idling behind her, a low mechanical presence that never quite blended into the natural soundscape, her voice rising just enough to carry across the water as she began listing regulations and guidelines, each word delivered with a rehearsed confidence that came from years of people not pushing back, the kind of tone that assumed agreement before the conversation even started, the way she tilted her head slightly as she spoke, like she was explaining something simple to someone who should already understand, the glint of sunlight reflecting off her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the expression in the tight line of her mouth, the faint rustle of paper as she flipped through documents that she clearly believed gave her control here, the subtle shift in the air as a breeze moved across the lake, rippling the surface, just enough to distort the reflection of her figure standing at the edge of my dock, the sound of ropes creaking softly as my pontoon adjusted with the movement, every inch of it maintained, balanced, cared for, in direct contrast to the detached way she talked about it like it was a problem to be managed, the distant buzz of another boat somewhere across the lake fading in and out, reminding me that there were others watching, listening, forming opinions based on how this moment unfolded. Karen stepping closer to the edge, her heel pressing into the wood as if testing its strength, her gaze finally settling on the pontoon with a slight frown, the kind that suggested inconvenience more than concern, her words tightening as she pointed toward it again, calling it oversized, out of compliance, using phrases that sounded official but felt hollow when placed against the reality of the space around us. The shoreline stretching wide and open, the water deep and calm, the boundaries clearly marked by posts that had stood long before she ever learned the name of this place. The soft lap of water against the dock punctuating her sentences like a quiet contradiction. The smell of lake water rising stronger now as the sun warmed the surface, mixing with the faint scent of engine oil and varnish that clung to my hands, grounding me in the physical reality of ownership, not paperwork, not assumption, but years of presence and care. Her voice continuing, listing consequences, mentioning fees, towing, enforcement, each word layered with the expectation that I would nod, comply, step aside, the way others probably had when faced with the same tone, the same clipboard, the same performance of authority, but there was something else beneath it, something just slightly off, a confidence built on incomplete information, on assumptions about boundaries she had never actually verified, the kind of oversight that only becomes visible when someone refuses to play along. The breeze picking up just enough to carry the scent of wildflowers again, softening the edge of the moment, but not the tension, my fingers tightening slightly around the railing as I watched her finish her explanation, the final page on her clipboard settling with a quiet slap, her posture straightening as if expecting immediate agreement, the silence that followed stretching just long enough to make the contrast clear. Her world of rules and measurements standing at the edge of a place defined by something much deeper, something she had not taken the time to understand, and that was the first real crack I saw, not in her authority, but in the foundation she thought it stood on. The silence after her last word hung in the air for half a second too long, broken only by the soft slap of water against the dock and the distant hum of a motorboat cutting across the far side of the lake, and then I heard it, the metallic clink of a tow hook being set down on the gravel behind her, a sound that did not belong to conversation but to action, to something already decided without me. My eyes shifting past her shoulder to the small flatbed truck idling at the ramp, its engine rumbling low, exhaust curling into the cool morning air, the smell of diesel now mixing with the scent of lake water and pine, thicker, heavier, the driver stepping out slowly, glancing between Karen and my boat like he was waiting for confirmation, his boots crunching on the gravel in slow, deliberate steps, and Karen did not even turn around. She just gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand like she was approving a routine task, her voice calm, almost bored as she said they would proceed if I did not comply, as if this entire place was just another line item on her clipboard, the word proceed landing heavier than anything she had said before, because now it was no longer about rules on paper, it was about hands on rope, metal on hull, movement where there should have been none, the pontoon shifting slightly as a breeze crossed the surface, sunlight catching on the chrome railings, the reflection rippling across the water like a warning, my fingers tightening around the dock railing, feeling the rough grain of the wood press into my palm, grounding me as the moment sharpened, the sound of the tow truck door closing behind me echoing louder than it should have, the driver picking up the hook, testing its weight, the faint squeak of metal under tension, and for a second, everything slowed, the kind of clarity that comes when a line is about to be crossed, the lake stretching out in front of me, calm, open, untouched, the boundary markers standing quietly along the far edge. Posts my grandfather had set by hand decades ago, still holding their place against time and weather, the breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers again, soft but steady, the water lapping gently at the dock as if reminding me exactly where I stood, Karen shifting her weight slightly, her heel tapping once against the wood, impatience creeping into her posture, her sunglasses reflecting the boat instead of me, as if I had already been removed from the equation, her voice cutting through the moment again, firmer this time, telling the driver to go ahead. And that was it. That was the point where everything she thought she understood collided with everything she had missed, because what she saw was a boat on water near a neighborhood she believed she controlled. But what she did not see was the invisible line just beyond the dock, the legal boundary that separated her authority from mine, the one written not in her documents, but in county records, in surveyed coordinates, in deeds. Older than her entire organization, the driver hesitating just slightly as he approached the edge, boots stopping at the transition from gravel to wood, his eyes scanning the dock, the water, the posts in the distance, something in his expression shifting as if he felt it too. That subtle difference in ground, in ownership, in permission. The hum of the cameras mounted under the eaves of the cabin clicking softly as they adjusted to the changing light, capturing every angle, every movement. The evidence already building before a single hook touched the boat. My breath steady now. The initial rush of anger settling into something colder, more precise. The kind of focus that comes from knowing the outcome before the first move is even made. Karen crossing her arms, clipboard pressed against her side, waiting for compliance that was never coming. The lake reflecting the sky in perfect stillness behind her, wide, open, and entirely beyond her reach, even if she did not know it yet. And as the driver took one more cautious step forward, the rope in his hand brushing lightly against the edge of the dock, I finally let go of the railing and took a step toward them, not to stop them, not to argue, but because this was the moment where her version of control was about to meet reality, and nothing about it was going to unfold the way she expected. The driver stopped just short of the edge, the tow hook hanging loosely in his hand, swaying slightly with each breath he took, and I could see it in his face, that hesitation. That quiet calculation that happens when something does not feel quite right. The kind of pause you only get when instinct starts whispering louder than instructions. And I stepped forward into that space before Karen could fill it again with her voice. The dock creaking under my weight. The sound sharp and deliberate. The morning air warming now, sunlight stronger against the back of my neck. The lake stretching out behind me like a mirror, calm and unbothered. And I raised my hand just slightly. Not aggressive. Not rushed. Just enough to redirect the moment, my voice steady, low, cutting through the tension without needing to rise, telling him to hold up for a second, that we needed to be clear on exactly what he was being asked to do. The words landing differently than Karen's had, not commands, but facts. And he shifted his stance, the gravel crunching again as he stepped back half an inch, eyes moving between us, and Karen let out a short breath, sharp, controlled, the sound of someone used to being obeyed. Her heel tapping once more against the dock as she stepped closer, closing the distance like pressure, her clipboard lifting again, pages flipping with a crisp, practiced motion, her voice returning with that same polished certainty, repeating regulations, citing sections, numbers, language. That sounded official but floated on the surface without anchoring to anything real out here. And I listened, letting her finish, because this part mattered, the moment where she believed she still had control, the water behind her catching the sunlight and scattering it into 1,000 shifting reflections, the ropes of my pontoon pulling slightly against their cleats as a breeze moved through, the faint hum of the cameras continuing their quiet recording, every second documented, every word captured, the smell of diesel lingering in the air, heavier now as the truck idled, mixing with the scent of warm wood and lake water. And when she finished, I nodded once, slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that signals acknowledgement without agreement. And I pointed past her, not at the boat, not at the dock, but at the line of markers stretching across the water, subtle but unmistakable if you knew what to look for, the posts aligned in a way that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with boundaries. The driver following my gesture, his eyes narrowing slightly as he traced that invisible line, and I spoke again, calm, measured, explaining exactly where he was standing, exactly what property this dock connected to, exactly how far the jurisdiction she was quoting actually reached. The words simple, clear, not dressed up, just laid out like coordinates on a map, and for a second, the only sound was the water, steady, rhythmic, the lake doing what it had always done, indifferent to paperwork and assumptions, and Karen laughed, a short, dismissive sound, shaking her head like I had just tried to complicate something that was already settled, her voice sharper now, pushing back, insisting that the association governed the entire shoreline, that compliance was not optional, that enforcement would proceed. But there was a shift, subtle but there, the first hint of uncertainty threading through her tone, the first moment where confidence had to be reinforced instead of simply assumed, and the driver looked at her, then back at me, the hook lowering slightly in his hand, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to notice, and I could feel it, the balance of the situation starting to tilt, not dramatically, not yet, but enough for doubt to enter the space where certainty had been, and I stepped aside just slightly, giving him a clearer view of the markers, the dock, the way everything aligned, the physical proof that did not need interpretation, and I told him again, quietly, that before he attached anything to that boat, he might want to double-check exactly whose water he would be pulling it from, because once that line was crossed, it was not just a job anymore. It was a decision, and decisions like that had consequences that did not disappear just because someone with a clipboard said they would. And the air shifted again, heavier now. The morning no longer just quiet and calm but charged, the kind of tension that builds when reality starts pushing back against assumption. And Karen's posture stiffened, her grip tightening on the clipboard, the pages bending slightly under her fingers, her voice starting to rise, as she tried to pull control back into her hands. But it was already slipping, inch by inch, second by second, and for the first time since she stepped onto my dock, she was not the only one directing what happened next. Karen's voice sharpened, louder now, cutting across the lake with an edge that did not belong to calm mornings, her words stacking faster, more forceful, as if volume could replace certainty, the clipboard snapping slightly as she flipped another page, pointing to sections and clauses that sounded impressive but felt disconnected from the ground beneath her feet, and the driver shifted again, his boots grinding small stones into the dirt, the tow hook lowering another inch, his eyes no longer fixed on the boat, but moving between the markers, the dock, the shoreline, piecing together something that Karen had clearly overlooked, the engine of the truck idling behind him. A steady rumble that seemed louder now in the growing silence between her sentences, the smell of diesel thickening as the morning warmed, mixing with the clean scent of water and wood, and I stayed where I was, not stepping forward, not raising my voice, just letting the space between us do the work, the kind of quiet that forces people to actually listen instead of react, my hand resting lightly on the railing, feeling the subtle vibration of the dock as the pontoon shifted against its ropes. Every small movement a reminder of how stable everything here was compared to the instability she was creating, and she took another step closer, closing the distance again, her posture tightening, shoulders squared, as if proximity alone could re-establish control, her words now directed at the driver more than me, instructing him to proceed, emphasizing authority, liability, compliance, the language of pressure, but there was hesitation now, a fraction of a second between her command and his response. A pause that did not exist before, and he glanced at me again, then back at the water, his grip on the hook loosening slightly, the metal swaying with a soft clink that echoed louder than it should have, the lake behind him stretching out in quiet contradiction to everything she was saying, calm, expansive, clearly defined if you knew how to read it, and I could see it settling in for him, not all at once, but enough to make him question whether this was as straightforward as it had been presented, and Karen noticed it too, her voice tightening further, a hint of urgency slipping in beneath the confidence, her heel tapping faster now against the dock, the sharp sound repeating like a metronome out of sync with the natural rhythm around us, the sunlight climbing higher, reflecting off the water in bright flashes that forced him to squint, his gaze drifting again toward the line of posts, following them farther this time, tracing the boundary all the way across the lake, and I spoke again, just once, quiet but clear, reminding him that towing a vessel is not just about attaching a hook and pulling, that it involves jurisdiction, authorization, and responsibility for where that vessel sits, and more importantly, whose property it is on. The words simple, grounded, not dressed up, just facts laid out in a way that did not need interpretation, and the effect was immediate, not dramatic, but undeniable, his shoulders dropping slightly, the tension in his stance easing. As the situation reframed itself in his mind, no longer a routine job, but something that required certainty he did not have, and Karen stepped in again, trying to close that gap, her clipboard lifting higher, her voice pushing harder, but it no longer landed the same way. The confidence behind it thinner now, stretched over uncertainty that she had not prepared for, the air shifting again, heavier, charged, the kind of tension that builds when control starts slipping but is not yet fully broken, and I could feel it settling into place, the balance no longer even, the space no longer hers to command without resistance. The cameras continuing their quiet recording, the dock steady beneath my feet, the lake stretching out behind her like a silent witness, and for the first time since she arrived, she was not dictating the pace of what happened next. She was reacting, adjusting, trying to regain something that had already begun to move beyond her reach, and I knew in that moment that this was no longer about stopping a tow. It was about exposing exactly how far her authority actually went, and how quickly it ended when it met something real. It was the way the wind shifted that made everything click, not the words, not the clipboard, not even the hesitation in the driver's hands, but the quiet movement of air across the lake carrying a faint metallic chime from the far boundary posts, a sound I had heard 1,000 times growing up, but never paid attention to until moments like this, when every detail sharpened and lined up. The markers standing in perfect alignment across the water, not random, not decorative, but deliberate, surveyed, recorded, anchored into county maps that most people never bothered to read, and I watched the driver's eyes follow that same line again, slower this time, more carefully, his brow tightening as he traced it from one post to the next, all the way across the lake to where the shoreline curved out of view, and I knew exactly what he was seeing, the realization forming piece by piece, that the water he was about to step into was not part of the open access Karen had described, but something else entirely, something defined long before her association ever existed, and Karen saw it too, not the boundary itself, but the shift in his attention, the way his stance changed, weight settling back instead of forward, the hook no longer an extension of her authority, but an object he was reconsidering, and her voice came faster now, sharper, pushing harder to fill the space before doubt could take hold, repeating the same points, the same rules, but louder, as if repetition could reinforce something that was already starting to crack, her heel striking the dock again, a sharper, faster rhythm now, the sound bouncing off the water in uneven beats, and I stayed still, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence between her words grow just enough to make room for what she was missing. Because this was not about overwhelming her with information, it was about letting the right details surface at the right time. The one thing she had overlooked in all her paperwork, and I reached into my jacket slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate, the fabric brushing against my fingers as I pulled out the folded survey map I always kept with me, edges worn from years of use, the paper carrying a faint smell of ink and dust, and I held it out, not to Karen, but to the driver, offering it without a word, the gesture simple but intentional, and he hesitated for half a second before taking it, the hook lowering fully to his side now, forgotten for the moment as he unfolded the map, the paper crackling softly in the quiet, his eyes scanning the lines, the coordinates, the shaded sections that matched exactly what he was looking at in front of him, the dock, the markers, the water itself, all aligning in a way that left very little room for interpretation. And I pointed once, just a single motion, to the section that defined the boundary. The legal description running along the edge in precise language that did not need volume to carry weight, and I explained, calm and even, that everything beyond that line, including the water beneath his feet if he stepped forward, fell under private control, not association guidelines, not neighborhood standards, but ownership backed by recorded deeds and surveyed land. The kind of detail that does not show up in quick summaries or simplified rulebooks, and he nodded slowly, almost to himself, the understanding settling in fully now, his shoulders relaxing in a way that told me the decision had already been made, even if he had not said it out loud yet, and Karen stepped closer again, her voice rising, questioning, challenging, asking what he was waiting for, why he was not proceeding, but it no longer landed the same way. The urgency in her tone exposing the gap between what she believed and what was actually happening. And he looked at her, then back at the map, then out at the water one more time, connecting all three. And when he spoke, it was quieter than her voice, but carried more weight, explaining that he needed to verify the jurisdiction before doing anything further, that he could not proceed based on conflicting information. And the words hung there, simple, professional, but final enough to shift the entire direction of the moment, and Karen's expression tightened, the first real sign of frustration. Breaking through the polished surface, her grip on the clipboard firm enough to bend the pages. Her posture stiffening as she realized this was no longer moving in a straight line toward her desired outcome. And I could feel it settle, the first clear break in her control, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, like the moment a current changes direction beneath the surface, invisible to most, but powerful enough to carry everything with it if you know how to read it. The paper in his hands made a soft crackling sound as he adjusted his grip, the edges catching the light just enough to highlight the lines that had been drawn decades ago, lines that did not care about opinions or assumptions, only measurements, coordinates, and recorded truth, and I could see it settling deeper in his expression now, that shift from uncertainty to clarity, the kind that does not come from being told, but from seeing it for yourself, the lake stretching out behind the map in perfect alignment with what was printed on it, every marker, every curve of the shoreline matching with quiet precision, and I reached into my back pocket again, pulling out a second folded document, thicker, heavier, the official county seal faintly embossed on the corner, the paper carrying that distinct smell of archived records, ink and time pressed together, and I handed it over without rushing, letting the weight of it speak before I even said a word, the driver taking it carefully this time, more deliberate, as if he already understood that what he was holding mattered, his fingers tracing the header, the legal description running down the page in structured language that left little room for interpretation, and I explained, steady and clear, that this was the recorded deed, filed long before any neighborhood association had even been proposed, outlining not just the land but the water rights extending outward from the shoreline, defining control in a way that did not change. Just because new rules were written elsewhere, the breeze lifting the corner of the page slightly, the sound soft but present, like the lake itself responding to the shift in the moment, and Karen stepped closer again, her voice cutting in, sharper now, questioning the relevance, dismissing it as outdated, insisting that modern regulations superseded older documents. But there was something missing in her tone now, something less certain, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. And the driver did not respond immediately, his attention still on the paper, eyes moving line by line, connecting it back to the map, back to the markers, back to the water in front of him, the hook now resting fully against his leg, no longer part of the equation, just a piece of equipment waiting for a decision that was already shifting away from Karen's direction, the hum of the truck idling behind him steady and constant, a reminder of the task he had been called here to do, but now it felt distant, secondary, like background noise compared to the clarity forming in front of him, and I pointed again, this time to a specific paragraph, the language precise, referencing the exact coordinates of the lake boundary, the rights attached to it, the limitations on external enforcement without proper jurisdiction, and I did not rush through it. I let each word land, giving him time to process, to align what he was reading with what he was seeing, the sunlight reflecting off the water in bright, shifting patterns that mirrored the lines on the page, the smell of warm wood rising from the dock as the temperature climbed, the soft creak of the planks under our feet grounding everything in place, and Karen's posture tightened further, her clipboard pressed firmly against her side now, no longer an instrument of control, but something she was holding onto, her voice rising again, faster, more insistent, repeating that the association governed the area, that compliance was mandatory, that enforcement actions were authorized, but each word felt thinner, stretched over a foundation that was no longer holding, and the driver finally looked up, not at me first, but at her, his expression calm but firm, the kind of look that comes when a decision has been made internally before it is spoken aloud, and he explained, measured and professional, that he could not proceed without clear jurisdiction, that the documents presented raised enough concern to require verification through proper channels, that towing under disputed ownership could create liability he was not willing to assume, and the words settled into the air with a weight that shifted everything again, Not loud, not dramatic, but final enough to stop the forward motion completely, and Karen's reaction came quickly, frustration breaking through. Now, her voice sharper, questioning his hesitation, pushing back harder, but it no longer had the same effect. The authority she had leaned on now visibly unstable, and I stood there, hands relaxed at my sides, the lake stretching out behind her in calm, unchanging certainty, the markers steady, the documents clear, the moment unfolding exactly as it needed to, not through force, not through volume, but through something much harder to argue with, something that does not bend to pressure or performance. And as the breeze moved across the water again, carrying that faint, familiar scent of pine and lake, I knew this was the point where everything she thought she controlled had officially stopped moving forward, and the only direction left was the one she had not prepared for. The air settled into a strange kind of quiet after his words, not the peaceful quiet of early morning, but something heavier, like the moment just before a storm decides whether it will break or pass. The low hum of the truck still running behind us now sounding almost out of place, like a machine waiting for instructions that were no longer coming. And Karen stood there for a second without speaking, her expression tightening, the edges of her confidence no longer smooth, the clipboard pressed firmly against her side as if holding onto it could restore control, the pages slightly bent from the pressure of her grip, and then she exhaled sharply, stepping back half a pace, her heels scraping against the wood with a harsh sound that cut through the stillness, her eyes moving quickly now, scanning the dock, the boat, the water, searching for something to anchor her authority again, but finding nothing that responded the way she expected. And that was when the shift extended beyond just the three of us, because I could feel it, the subtle awareness from the surrounding shoreline, the distant figures that had paused on their own docks, the faint silhouettes of neighbors watching from across the water, not close enough to hear every word, but close enough to see what mattered, the posture, the hesitation, the change in direction, and the lake carried that awareness quietly, the surface reflecting everything back in soft, distorted light, turning small movements into signals that traveled farther than voices, and the driver cleared his throat, a small sound but enough to break the tension again, folding the documents carefully before handing them back to me, his movements slower now, more deliberate, like someone who had stepped into a situation expecting routine and found something else entirely, and he nodded once, respectful, acknowledging the information without needing to say more, his decision already settled even if Karen was not ready to accept it, and I took the papers back, folding them along the same creases worn in from years of use, sliding them into my jacket with a practiced motion, the fabric brushing against my hands, grounding me again in something steady, something real, and Karen stepped forward again, but this time there was a difference, not in her words, which still came fast and sharp, but in the way they landed, the force behind them no longer pushing outward but trying to hold something together, her voice rising slightly as she insisted that this was not over, that she would escalate, that the association had resources, connections, procedures. But the driver did not move, the hook still resting at his side, the truck still idling without purpose, the entire scene suspended between what she wanted to happen and what actually would, and I could see it in his posture now, that quiet refusal, not confrontational, not aggressive, just firm, the kind that comes from understanding the line you are not willing to cross, and Karen noticed it too, her words faltering for the first time, just a fraction of a second, where she paused, recalibrating, searching for a new angle, a new approach, but the moment had already shifted too far, the initial momentum gone, replaced by something slower, heavier, more grounded, and the lake remained unchanged through all of it, the water steady, the markers unmoved, the boundaries exactly where they had always been, indifferent to the argument playing out on the dock, and I let the silence stretch again, not filling it, not rushing to conclude anything, because this part mattered just as much as the earlier tension, the part where realization settles in, where control slips not with a sudden break, but with a gradual, undeniable shift, and Karen's shoulders stiffened as she straightened up, pulling her posture back into something more composed, more calculated, her voice lowering slightly now, controlled again but no longer effortless, stating that she would be following up, that this was not resolved, that there would be further action, but it sounded different now. Less like a command and more like a statement made to regain footing. And the driver finally turned toward his truck, not abruptly, not dismissively, just with the quiet understanding that his part in this moment was finished, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked back, the sound steady and unhurried, the engine noise growing slightly louder as he approached. And for the first time since this started, Karen was standing. Without movement around her, no action being taken, no compliance being given. Just the lake, the dock, and the reality she had not prepared for settling into place. And as I watched her, standing there with the clipboard that no longer carried the same weight, I knew this was only the surface of what was coming next, because moments like this do not end things, they expose them. And once something like that is exposed, it has a way of unfolding much further than anyone expects. The truck engine finally cut off with a low, fading rumble that seemed to pull the last thread of momentum out of the situation, leaving only the natural sounds of the lake to fill the space again. The gentle lap of water against the dock, the faint rustle of leaves shifting in the breeze, and the distant call of a bird echoing across the open water. And in that quiet, everything felt clearer, sharper, like the moment had stripped away anything unnecessary and left only what mattered. Karen, standing there with her clipboard held a little tighter than before, her posture still composed but no longer effortless. The confidence she had arrived with now recalibrating into something more controlled, more deliberate, her eyes moving again across the dock, the boat, the markers, but this time not with the same certainty, more like she was trying to reconcile what she had just encountered with what she believed should have happened. And I could see it in the small details, the slight pause before she spoke, the way her shoulders adjusted, the way her gaze lingered just a fraction longer on the boundary posts. The realization not fully accepted but no longer ignored, and I turned slightly, glancing out over the lake, letting the moment breathe, the sunlight now fully up, reflecting in bright patterns across the surface, the water stretching wide and calm, unchanged by everything that had just taken place, the pontoon rocking gently at its mooring, ropes taut, the chrome rail catching flashes of light that moved with the ripples, every detail steady, grounded, exactly where it belonged. And that steadiness was the contrast, the thing she could not override with paperwork or volume, the physical reality of a place that had been defined long before she stepped into it. And behind me, I heard the driver shift again, the soft sound of his boots on gravel as he moved back toward the truck, not rushed, not hesitant, just resolved, opening the door with a solid click, the interior light flickering on briefly before he stepped in, the door closing with a final, contained sound that marked the end of his involvement, the engine starting again, but this time not as a signal of action, more like a transition, a quiet exit from a situation that had already decided itself. And Karen turned slightly toward him, her voice lower now, controlled, asking something under her breath. But he only shook his head once, a small, professional gesture that carried more weight than any argument. And then he put the truck into gear, the tires crunching slowly over the gravel as he pulled away from the ramp, the sound fading as he moved down the narrow road, leaving behind a space that felt different now, less crowded, more defined, and I could feel the shift settle in fully, not just in the absence of the truck, but in the way the entire scene had rebalanced, the tension no longer pressing forward but dispersing outward, leaving behind clarity instead of conflict. And Karen remained where she was, the clipboard still in her hand, but no longer the center of anything. Her gaze fixed for a moment on the path the truck had taken, then back to me, her expression composed again, but with a different kind of focus, not the assumption of control she had arrived with, but something more calculated, more aware, and she took a slow breath, the movement subtle but noticeable, as if resetting, recalibrating for what came next, her voice returning but quieter now, measured, stating that this situation would be reviewed, that documentation would be requested, that further action would be taken through proper channels. The words structured, deliberate, no longer pushing for immediate compliance, but shifting into a longer game, one she clearly believed she could still win if given time. And I nodded once, not dismissive, not confrontational, just acknowledging the shift, because she was not entirely wrong. This was not finished, but it was no longer what she thought it was. And the difference mattered, the kind of difference that changes outcomes before they even fully unfold. and as the breeze moved across the lake again, carrying that familiar mix of pine, water, and warm wood, I felt it settle in. That quiet certainty, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, the kind that does not need to prove itself in the moment because it is already rooted in something deeper, something that does not move just because someone expects it to. And Karen turned slightly, her heels clicking against the dock as she stepped back toward the ramp, each step controlled, deliberate, the sound echoing softer now against the water, and as she reached the edge, she paused for just a second, looking out across the lake. Again, not speaking, not asserting anything, just taking in the space in front of her, and I knew in that moment that she had seen enough to understand that this was not going to be as simple as she had planned, that whatever came next would not start from the same position she had assumed when she first stepped onto my dock, and that was where everything truly began. By the time her car disappeared down the narrow road, the lake had already reclaimed the moment, the sound of tires on gravel fading into nothing, replaced again by the steady rhythm of water against wood and the distant hum of life continuing as if nothing had happened. But I knew better, because moments like that do not end when people leave. They settle into the ground, into the air, into the quiet spaces where decisions start forming. And I stayed on the dock a little longer, letting the sunlight warm the boards beneath my boots, the heat rising slowly through the soles, grounding me in the aftermath, the pontoon shifting gently beside me, ropes creaking softly as the breeze picked up just enough to move the surface of the water into small, consistent ripples, each one catching the light and breaking it into fragments that danced across the hull. The smell of lake water stronger now, warmed by the sun, mixing with the faint scent of oil and varnish that clung to everything I had built and maintained, and I walked the length of the dock slowly, checking each cleat, each knot, each line, not because I expected anything to be wrong, but because that was what I did, the routine that kept everything in order, the small, deliberate actions that built stability over time. And as I reached the end, I paused, looking out across the water again, following the line of markers from one end to the other, the same line the driver had traced, the same line Karen had missed, and I could almost see the next steps unfolding in my mind, not as guesses, but as patterns I had seen before, because people like her do not walk away from something like this. They regroup, they gather documents, they make calls, they try to rebuild authority through channels that feel stronger than a single moment on a dock, and that was fine, because this was never about winning an argument in the morning. It was about being ready for what came after. And I turned back toward the cabin, the screen door creaking softly as I stepped inside, the cooler air brushing against my face, carrying the familiar smell of coffee and old wood, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan steady overhead, and I moved toward the desk where I kept everything organized, not stacked in chaos, but laid out in a way that made sense, folders labeled, documents sorted, years of records kept not out of paranoia, but out of habit, the kind of habit that comes from understanding that ownership is not just about having something. It is about being able to prove it when it matters, and I pulled open the drawer, the wood sliding smoothly, revealing the full set of documents, not just the ones I had shown, but everything. The original surveys, the updated filings, the correspondence with county offices, the permits, the maintenance logs, each piece fitting into a larger picture that extended far beyond a single morning confrontation, and I placed the map and deed back into their proper place, aligning the edges carefully, the paper making a soft, precise sound as it settled, and I took a moment to run my hand across the surface of the desk, feeling the smooth grain beneath my fingers. The texture worn slightly from years of use, a physical reminder of the time and attention invested here, and outside, the sound of a boat passing in the distance drifted in through the open window, the engine note low and steady, moving along the far side of the lake where the association's docks began, and that was when the next piece clicked into place, not as a reaction, but as a plan. The realization that control was not just about defending what was mine, but about defining the terms of access moving forward. Because if there was one thing this morning had made clear, it was that assumptions had been allowed to grow unchecked, lines blurred not because they did not exist, but because no one had forced them back into focus, and I stepped back outside, the sunlight brighter now, the lake alive with movement, small boats cutting gentle paths across the surface, each one staying within the areas they believed they could use. And I looked toward the far side, toward the cluster of docks and boats that belonged to the association, their presence orderly, structured, but all of it sitting just beyond the line that mattered most, and I could feel it settling into place, not as anger, not as retaliation, but as clarity, the kind that leads to action taken at the right time, in the right way. And as the breeze moved across the water again, carrying that familiar scent of pine and sun-warmed lake, I knew that what happened next would not be loud or rushed. It would be precise, deliberate, and impossible to ignore once it unfolded, because the real shift had already happened, and everything from here on out would build on that foundation. The next morning did not arrive with noise or confrontation. It came quietly, the kind of quiet that settles in before something changes for good. The lake smooth as glass under the early light, the air carrying that cool edge before the sun fully takes over. And I was already moving before most of the shoreline had woken up, boots steady on the gravel, the soft crunch familiar, the scent of pine and damp earth rising with each step as I walked the perimeter again, not checking this time, but preparing, the kind of preparation that does not draw attention until it is already complete, and the first sign of it was subtle, almost invisible if you were not looking for it. A small metal post at the edge of the dock where the property line begins, freshly set, aligned perfectly with the existing markers across the water, its surface catching just enough light to stand out against the natural tones of wood and shoreline. And then another, further down, each one placed with precision, not decoration, not suggestion, but clear, physical confirmation of boundaries that had always existed on paper, but were now impossible to overlook. The sound of metal settling into soil faint but solid, each placement deliberate, measured, matching coordinates I knew by memory, the same coordinates written into the documents resting inside the cabin. And as the sun climbed higher, those markers began to reflect across the water, small flashes of light that connected into a line, visible now even from a distance. The lake itself quietly reinforcing what had been ignored, and I moved back toward the dock, wiping my hands against my jeans, the texture of dust and metal still clinging to my fingers, the faint smell of fresh earth mixing with the familiar scent of lake water. And that was when the next piece fell into place, not through confrontation, but through presence, because the association boats began to appear, one by one, engines humming softly as they moved out onto the water, following the same paths they always had, routine, unthinking, guided by habit more than awareness. And I watched as the first one approached the line, slowing just slightly, the driver noticing something different, the markers now visible where they had not been before, the alignment too precise to ignore, the boundary no longer abstract but physical, defined. And he hesitated, the engine dropping to a lower idle, the wake behind him softening into gentle ripples. And another boat followed, then another, each one reacting in the same way. The movement across the lake shifting, not stopped, but redirected, guided by something that had always been there, but had never been enforced this clearly. And the sound of engines became uneven, some accelerating away, others idling as their operators tried to understand what had changed, the water reflecting their uncertainty in broken patterns of light, the smooth surface now marked by hesitation instead of confidence. And I stayed on the dock, not signaling, not calling out, just present. The quiet center of a shift that did not need to be announced, the markers doing the work, the lake itself responding. And then her car appeared again at the far end of the road, the white surface catching the sunlight as it pulled up near the ramp, stopping harder this time. The door opening quickly, her steps faster, more direct, the sound of her heels sharper against the gravel, cutting through the softer sounds of the morning. And she stopped at the edge of the dock again, her gaze moving immediately to the water, to the markers, to the boats adjusting their paths. And there it was, the moment where everything aligned. The realization not gradual this time, but immediate, visible in the way her posture shifted, the way her shoulders tightened, the way her eyes traced the line across the lake and found no gap, no ambiguity, no room to reinterpret what she was seeing, the boundary now undeniable, the access she had assumed no longer available. And the lake continued its quiet rhythm beneath it all, the water steady, the light reflecting, the air carrying that same mix of pine and sun-warmed surface, unchanged by the tension it now held, and I met her gaze without stepping forward, without speaking, because this was not a moment for explanation. It was a moment for understanding, the kind that does not come from words but from seeing something clearly for the first time. And as another boat slowed at the line and turned away, the wake spreading outward in soft, fading ripples, I knew that the shift was complete, not through force, not through argument, but through something far more effective, something that could not be ignored, because it was now part of the landscape itself. She did not say anything at first, and that silence told me more than anything she could have put into words, because the version of control she carried onto my dock the day before did not survive what she was looking at now. The line of markers stretching across the lake like a quiet statement that did not need approval, the boats turning before they reached it, the water itself guiding them away without a single command being spoken. And I watched her take it in, the details settling one by one, the alignment, the spacing, the consistency that left no room for interpretation. Her clipboard still in her hand, but lowered now, no longer raised like a shield or a tool, just something she had not yet decided to let go of. The sunlight catching the edge of it as she shifted her grip, the reflection briefly flashing across the dock before disappearing again, and the lake moved on around us, steady, unchanged, the gentle lap of water against the wood continuing its rhythm, the breeze carrying the scent of pine and warm surface water, the distant hum of boats now redirected into new paths that curved along the edge of what they could no longer cross. And she stepped forward once, slow, measured, her heels quieter this time against the dock, the sharpness from before replaced by something more controlled, more aware, her eyes following the line again, not searching for a flaw, but confirming what was already clear, and I stayed where I was, hands relaxed at my sides, not needing to point, not needing to explain. Because this was no longer a conversation, it was an understanding, the kind that forms when reality settles in without resistance. And after a few seconds, she let out a breath, not sharp like before, not forced, just steady, the kind that comes when something shifts internally, her shoulders easing just slightly as she straightened, her posture adjusting not to assert control, but to hold composure. And when she finally spoke, her voice was different, still firm, still structured, but stripped of the assumption that had carried it the day before, acknowledging the boundary without using the word, referring instead to clarification, to documentation, to review, the language of someone repositioning rather than commanding, and I nodded once. A simple acknowledgement that matched the tone of the moment, because there was no need to push further. The point had already been made in a way that could not be undone, and the boats continued to move along the edge of the markers, their wakes spreading in soft arcs that faded before they reached the line, the water absorbing each movement without disruption, the system resetting itself naturally around what had been reinforced. And Karen turned slightly, looking out across the lake one more time, her gaze lingering not on me, but on the space itself, the stretch of water that now carried a different meaning than it had for her before. And then she stepped back, turning toward the ramp with the same controlled movement, each step deliberate, the sound of her heels steady but no longer sharp, her pace measured, as if she was already thinking ahead, already adjusting to what this meant for everything she had planned. And I watched her reach her car, the door opening and closing with a softer sound this time, the engine starting, the vehicle idling for a second before pulling away down the road, the gravel shifting under the tires in a slow, even pattern that faded as she disappeared from view, and the lake settled fully again, the last trace of tension dissolving into the normal rhythm of the day, the sunlight now high, reflecting off the water in bright, steady patterns, the markers standing in quiet alignment, no longer new, no longer questioned, just part of the landscape. And I walked to the end of the dock once more, looking out across everything my family had held on to for generations, the water, the shoreline, the boundaries that had always been there whether anyone chose to see them or not. And I rested my hand on the railing, feeling the warmth of the sun-soaked wood under my palm, the texture familiar, solid, unchanged. And I thought about how easily things can be misunderstood when they are left unspoken, how quickly assumptions can grow when lines are not reinforced, and how simple it can be to correct that when you know exactly where you stand. Because in the end, Nothing here had changed, not the lake, not the land, not the rights that defined it. The only thing that shifted was the way it was seen, and that was enough, because justice does not always arrive with noise or force. Sometimes it settles in quietly, measured, precise, and once it is there, it does not need to announce itself to be understood.